Hello there, everybody. My name is Glenn Wilkinson. Welcome to my kitchen. This is where I make the majority of my artwork. The YouTube channel you are currently watching is called Glenn Art Stuffs, and today I'm gonna be doing a detailed breakdown of this picture here and how I made it. Right, so for this picture I just started drawing with a pen straight away. As you can see, the picture was based on a quick sketch that I did on location of Newburn Town Hall with lots of other buildings in the background, and that's the picture that you can see put over the top there. The sketch had a lot of kind of strange aspects about it. There was a lot of wonky lines, and the roof was higher on one side and stuff like that. And in the original sketch, that was actually by accident. But when I decided to make like a proper piece of work out of that sketch, like the one that I'm doing now, which is just a kind of like very experimental piece of work, what I decided to do was just deliberately lean into those mistakes in the original sketch and kind of bring them out even more, which is why I've deliberately just done a really conky, wonky sort of pen drawing like that. And as you can see, I was just doing kind of unbroken lines. I wasn't doing sketchy lines. I wasn't trying to do like a sketch or an underdrawing, because I wanted those lines to actually show through. I was just kind of trying to, I didn't want to have like a very even covering of ink, as you can tell, so I used a lot of different techniques of putting water on the paper and just kind of dropping the ink into it and letting it flow out and things like that. And I put things like green on the wall. I wasn't from the very beginning. I wasn't intending to actually leave those green bits green. What I was thinking was I was going to put like a kind of a brown or like an orange or a reddy colour over the top of that green, and then in watercolour, and you would be able to see the green through it, which would kind of desaturate the brown, which would make the wall darker. That was my kind of intention. And I was also thinking, like, if you do see some of the green through it, then that would be a good thing, because it makes the picture more interesting if you can see lots of colours coming through underneath. So that's what I was planning on doing, was just doing this thing in layers. And I'm using a lot of kind of strange techniques here. I'm not just laying the ink down straight away. I'm kind of laying down water and then dabbing the ink into it to let it kind of spread out, and then I'm dabbing it with blue roll and things like that. Of course, this part that I'm doing now is more conventional. I'm putting some ink straight down. Or am I? I'm not sure if I actually am. Is that? Yeah, no, that's I'm just putting some green ink down onto the page, and those parts where the green ink is where I'm hoping they're gonna show through, and I'm hoping there's gonna be they're gonna kind of desaturate the colour that goes over the top of it, since the colour that goes over the top of it's probably gonna be a reddish kind of colour, which is gonna make a kind of shadowy kind of thing. Now I'm putting some water on and just putting some ink down, just letting the ink kind of sink into the water a little bit, letting it spread out. Not trying to cover the entire thing in ink, just dabbing it on in little bits. Gonna paint over that with watercolor, so it's good to just let it show through in a textured way. Don't want to kind of completely clear, smooth ink covering for this first layer. Now what I'm doing is I'm just using some ultramarine blue there, and once again India ink. All of this that I'm using here is India ink, by the way. I haven't used any other mediums yet, other than the fine liner, obviously, that I drew the outline with. And I'm putting some ultramarine India ink over all the windows there. A sip of tea. Yeah. This picture was an absolute blast to do, by the way. This mixed media picture, because it was very improvisational. You know, sometimes I plan my art quite a lot beforehand, and sometimes I'll kind of do a lot of rough sketching on the page or on the canvas or whatever surface I'm doing my art on before I start. But on this particular piece, I didn't do any of that. I just started drawing straight away. No underdrawing, nothing like that. And here I'm just basically putting some water down on the roof, so I can kind of just, you know, drop some ink onto that and watch it kind of spread out onto the roof. And you'll see me do that in a second. Yeah, there we go. So I'm just kind of dabbing on the brown very loosely, letting it kind of sink into the water a little bit. And on the side, I put some green ink down. Once again, this is all ink at the minute, all Indian ink. Oh no, not green straight away. Sorry, I used black first. And then I'm kind of putting some blue roll down over that, you know. Sometimes it creates an interesting texture when you lift up the blue roll and you've kind of absorbed it. Other times I'll just leave the ink to just dry by itself, like I have with the brown there. Of course, what I've done here is I've got some more green, and I'm kind of going around the brown. Around the black with the green, and just creates some extra colour, extra texture, I should say. Yeah. And what I'm doing here is I'm just dripping on some sepia brown ink. Of course, I dripped it on very, very thick. So there's like very thick drips of brown sepia ink there, which means it doesn't really look brown. It looks more black because of how thick it is. And you can't see under my hand there, but I'm just sucking up the sepia ink and then squirting it back out again a little bit. Blowing some water into it, making bubbles. The bubbles are popping, making nice splatters across the rest of the roof. Those splatters were things that are, you know, those were the type of things that I wanted in this picture. Was a lot of splatters and a lot of. I wanted this picture to be very messy. It's the whole point in doing a kind of mixed media watercolor and ink picture. Just doing a little bit with the brush there. Wasn't really sure what I was doing there. Could have easily done without doing that little bit with the brush that I did there. Yeah. Now this is later on after it's dried. As you can see, all the ink's kind of dried in now. And what I'm doing is I'm doing a little bit of collage here. I wanted to put some collage. I've got some PVA glue on the side just off camera, and I'm using like a palette knife to spread the PVA glue on and then stick the pieces down. The thing that I'm collaging on is some leftover wallpaper that my mum has a doll's house, and she's been doing up a doll's house recently. So yeah, I was using some leftover bits of wallpaper, so you can see there's a kind of stony effect on the little bits of paper that I'm using there, and I just teared it. I didn't want to cut it. I didn't want it to be too neat. But if you want to tear something in a way which which doesn't get the kind of white marks around it, all you have to do is basically tear the thing that you want towards you. And what I'm doing now is I'm adding on some oil pastel. I'm adding little circles because you see the original sketch that it was based on had these little kind of red dots, and this sketch was done very quickly on a location, so those little red dots were kind of sort of a very naive way of expressing the brickwork, the masonry on the building. And like I said, with this picture, I wanted to kind of just work with some of the, the idiosyncrasies of that sketch. So instead of doing like proper brickwork on this thing, I decided to sort of do some very strange kind of abstract, kind of like brick coloured, kind of reddish dots there. And you can see what I've done is also as I've gone over the top of them with some white oil pastel, gone over the bottom with them with a charcoal coloured oil pastel, and what this does is it makes those dots like three-dimensional a little bit. It kind of gives them some volume so that they look like kind of almost like strange rocks kind of sticking out of the surface. And here I am with a candle. The idea here with the candle was to put some candle wax on the surface so that when I put the watercolor down, the watercolor will kind of not sit over the candle wax. So therefore, the lines that I've made with the candle afterwards will kind of open up after the watercolor's been put on. I wasn't satisfied with the kind of bluntness of the edge of the candle, so I sawed a little bit off the bottom with a wood saw there, and got a lot of wax all over my drawing board, so I was trying to kind of brush that off with my palette knife, which maybe isn't the best way of brushing it off, which is why I picked up a bit of blue roll afterwards and sort of got in with that. And then I had a sharper edge to draw in some lines in candle wax. Very frustrating though, actually. I didn't much like doing that part because you can't see what you're doing at all. It really wasn't. It wasn't even a line that I could see very well. I mean, obviously you couldn't see it when I was drawing it there on the camera, but it wasn't even a line that I could see myself. So yeah, now I'm going over with some watercolor here. This is a burnt sienna watercolor, and I'm leaving a lot of gaps because obviously I want the ink blotches that I've made underneath to kind of come through a little bit. I want the wall to be very textured. I don't want it to be a smooth, even covering. I don't want it to look like a real wall. I want it to be kind of, the representational picture in this is kind of almost like an excuse. There's a lot of a kind of abstract influence in this piece. So it's all about the textures and the shapes and colours and blotches and stuff. As you can see, I'm putting some salt down on that wall. It's quite a common tactic with quite a common technique with watercolours is to put some salt on the watercolours. What I'm doing here is doing it the other way around. I'm putting the salt down first, and then I'm going to put the watercolour over the top of the salt, which works fairly well. It works fairly well. The advantages of it is there's no way that your watercolor can dry before you put the salt in. Like if you put the salt on afterwards, sometimes the watercolor might dry a bit before the salt goes onto it. With this, that doesn't happen, but of course there are disadvantages of this as well, which is that you get a lot of salt on your brush, and you might potentially get some of it into your watercolor as well. But I was using pretty cheap watercolor for this, so I wasn't too bothered about getting salted in the watercolor. I think pardon me. I think I managed to avoid getting salt in the watercolor though. I was being fairly careful with that. Just brushing it with blue roll a little bit, just in case there's any salt gotten onto any other parts of the picture, which, to be fair, it had, but you know, it's okay. And yeah. So, I've forgotten what I did next. Some more water there, clean water, because I didn't want to have like a salty water for this next part. Oh yeah, what I did now is I got out a really cheap oil pastel. The oil pastel that I did the big circular stones with, they were kind of fairly sort of like fancy oil pastels, whereas this oil pastel here is like a very cheap oil pastel. It's the closest thing I had to a crayon. I would have rather done this with a crayon, but I didn't actually have a crayon to hand, so this was the closest thing I had. And I'm just drawing on some masonry there, just drawing on some brick patterns. And the idea here is that it's going to be kind of very similar sort of idea to the candle wax. And when I kind of put the watercolor on, putting it on quite watery there. There was a gap there because there was a gap where I forgot to film. Putting the watercolor on quite watery, and it kind of opens up over the marks that I made with the cheap oil pastel there. As you can see, I'm just painting over the bits of collage that I did, but I'm leaving some spaces over where I put the ink on. Some of the ink is left uncovered, some of it isn't. Helps give the wall a lot of texture. Using a different colour for that, more of a crimson colour for the top part of the wall there, whereas obviously I was using a burnt sienna for the bottom part of the wall. And on the roof here, I was using kind of a mixture of Payne's grey and ultramarine blue, or was it ultramarine blue? No, actually I don't think it was. I think it was it might have been phthalo blue actually that I was mixing with the Payne's grey. It's not an even covering of ultramarine and it's not an even covering of Payne's grey and phthalo blue, because I was kind of doing a little bit and then mixing it again. The problem with keeping your paints very watery is you can never really mix enough of them to kind of cover a whole area. Put some brown over the side there just to differentiate that. And then I'm going in with a yellow ochre here and doing these stones on the side. This bit of painting that you can see me doing here is a more conventional type of watercolor painting, because I'm just sort of just delicately brushing on the color that I need, and putting a little bit of a shadow color underneath these stones, and then doing the same on the other side, obviously. And I'm using a kind of slightly different. So this is a kind of yellow ochre with some other colours mixed into it. I think it might have had a bit of burnt sienna and some green in there, just to give it a slightly different tone around the side. Then of course, just painting the windows, painting them with the yellow ochre. Around the door as well. Made a little mistake there, painted a part that I was supposed to leave white. And you can see I've just painted straight over the green. And this is the fun bit. I grabbed some ultramarine blue ink, I don't know why I've decided to suddenly start showing my supplies to the camera at this stage, whereas I wasn't before then. I've got the little eyedropper. That eyedropper was actually taken from the sepia ink that I had, but I cleaned it out, cleaned all the sepia ink out of it, and yep, this is the fun bit, just squirting the ultramarine blue onto the sky with the eyedropper, and you can't really see it at this stage because my hand's in the way, but I was touching the eyedropper to the kind of drips of ink that I had there, and I was sort of squeezing them out to make bubbles, and then I was sucking the ink back in, and then I was kind of putting the ink in new places and kind of moving the ink around like that a little bit. Very fun way of covering an area with ink, just kind of putting some drops on and sucking the drops back into the eyedropper, then squeezing them out again, blowing some bubbles into the drops, making the bubbles pop and spatter all over the place. There was a little bit of obviously risk involved here because I didn't want to get too much of the ink over the picture in the middle. I didn't mind getting a little bit, obviously. I didn't mind getting a few splashes here and there, you know, and obviously the teeny tiny drips that went over that way, they were perfectly fine. I didn't mind getting some of those in the picture in the middle, but I didn't want to kind of absolutely cover it, you know. I didn't want to get drips just absolutely splashed all over it, so, you know, there was some risk involved here, but this is a very experimental piece of work here. And yeah, I just tried to cover it as much. This is just pure ink at this stage, just pure blue ink. Trying to kind of suck those drops in and spat them back out again as much as I can. And then in a bit you'll see I just start filling the eyedropper with water. Here we go. Yep, and this was the introduction. You may remember the video opened on this. And just squirting some water onto the ink there. Just to try and get a larger covering of the ink there. I didn't want to just go over with a brush because obviously there's no fun in that. If I just went over with a wet brush, then I would have just kind of basically brushed out all of my drips, you know, which isn't what I was wanting to do. I was wanting to get in there, get messy, you know, start spraying the blue ink around with some water there. Yeah, but got very, very wet. Very, very wet at this stage. And this is watercolor paper, so it is quite thick paper, but because of the extent of how, you know, I went very, 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 very wet here. You know, it was absolutely swimming in water around the sides there, so you know, I did get very, very wet, and because of that, you know, some of the ink did go through onto the piece of paper below, even though it was quite thick paper. So yeah, you need to have pretty substantial paper in order to do this. The paper got very, very crinkled. It might have paid me to stick the paper down somewhere or stick it to something before I started, but you know, I didn't, and you know, so my paper got crinkled. So yeah, I didn't go obviously too close to the thing in the middle. Like I said, I didn't want to kind of completely spatter that in ink. So what I'm doing now is I've just got some watercolor, which is also ultramarine blue, and I'm kind of basically colouring in the white gaps with the ultramarine watercolor, which I thought was a kind of a cool way to kind of cover the space a bit more, because you can't really actually tell that much of a difference between the ultramarine watercolor and the ultramarine India ink. So yeah, when you look at the finished thing, it kind of, you can't really tell where the watercolor begins and the India ink ends, which is kind of how I wanted it, you know, because I wanted to keep that I didn't want to just go in with indie ink because I thought, you know, painting around the indie ink with more indie ink might kind of get rid of some of the texture that I've made with the spatters of indie ink all over it. That was me just lifting it up to have a look underneath to see whether it went through. It had went through, as I said before. Yeah, and what I'm doing now, just putting a little bit of brown underneath these stones here. I don't think that was quite successful. Oh yeah, I realised I'd missed a bit there, so I just painted in some burnt sienna in there just to kind of fill in that bit. And now I'm going around the windows, with some burnt sienna. Going around this very ornamental window, some burnt sienna. As you can see though, I decided to go over that with black afterwards because I just wanted it to stand out a little bit more. Now I'm going around the windows with some white gouache. That's what this is, with some white gouache, just to bring out that white around the windows a little bit more, and around the door. And this kind of tower thing on the top, I went over that with some gouache mixed with watercolor to make the watercolor more opaque, although obviously it didn't make it completely opaque. Oh god, I'm such a minger, I'm almost bloody burping in my bloody voiceovers. I do apologise for that. This is the day after, so everything's completely dry now. And what I did was I went in with some oil pastels to fill in the parts that I hadn't filled in yet. I decided I'd done... Sorry, just having a sip of tea. I decided I'd done enough crazy abstract stuff to this point, so the parts that were left, I decided to do in a more kind of conventional way. So went in with some oil pastels and just kind of, you know, delicately put in all the colours that I wanted to underneath there. Some Payne's grey around the to make a line along the bottom of the roof. Put on some white on the front of the corbels there. Got some different shades of grey just to kind of create some shadow underneath the corbels. I don't know if you can see that yet. Well, you can't see it yet because my hand's in the way. So we're doing a more conventional style of drawing here. Fill it in with oil pastel. Put some grey under the overhang of the roof there, because that would be in shadow, that part obviously. Smudge it in a bit. Am I smudging it in? I can't remember. Put some chrome brown, I think they call that, that kind of light beigey colour that I put underneath the arch there. I'm doing a nice smudge with my finger over the Payne's grey line just to make it less broken up and oil pastel-y. Now what I'm doing here is something I've never actually done before this piece. Actually, I'm just putting some white oil pastel over the top of the roof, which was obviously done with layers of indie ink and watercolor, and I'm just smudging some oil pastel over it there to kind of lighten up this bottom lip of the roof. You know, I wanted that bottom lip of the roof to look like it was bending outwards, so I wanted to put a little bit more light on there. And now I'm getting some browns, some greys, some yellows, mixing them together, smudging them together, doing some masonry with grey lines, and I'm doing chimneys here, brown chimneys with masonry, trying to leave some of that those kind of big ink splodges, you know, not cover them up. Put some white on the top there to give a little bit more light to the top of the roof, and then I put a little bit of white on the top of the arch there and smudged it downwards to try and kind of bring out that shape a little bit more. And here you go. This is the finished picture. Yeah, I was quite proud of this picture. I thought it had a lot going on in it. It was very, very crazy, all over the place, very textured. You know, exactly what I was wanting to achieve with this picture. It's absolutely bonkers. There's no straight lines. Yeah, there's a lot of splashes and splodges and kind of messy, kind of chaotic ink experiments there. There's a lot of texture, layers of texture underneath the top colours. You know, it's yeah, it's very weathered looking. There's a lot of splashes, a lot of tiny little ink splashes all over it. Yeah, I would say it was a big success. I was very happy with this piece. And yeah, so this is the end of the video. So there's nothing else to say but the usual stuff. You know, if you did like this video, then please like and subscribe. Please, you know, you can click the bell icon as well if you want to click the bell icon. That means that you'll get notifications for all of my new videos. I do realise that can be a bit annoying though, so I understand if you don't do that. But yeah, if you like the video, then please subscribe to the channel. There's more videos like this and more videos that aren't like this, and yeah, it's just a bit all over the place, but it's an interesting channel for those of you who like creative things. So thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you all around, hopefully. Bye bye.